Ukraine is under full-scale Russian assault.
Shells continue to rain down on Kharkiv.
Right after Russia started the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, all the EU and NATO countries rushed to condemn the invasion. Hungary also did the same as a member state of both NATO and the EU. But very reluctantly, Viktor Orban, who won a fourth consecutive term with a landslide in an election held last week, condemned the Russian invasion of neighboring Ukraine, but he has so far refrained from any criticism of Putin himself. Despite joining many EU sanctions put on Russia during the early days of the invasion, Orban has opposed any sanctions on Russian oil and gas and pledged to veto them. He has also refused to send weapons to Ukraine, unlike many other EU and NATO countries. Hungary has also banned any Western arms shipments through Hungarian territory to Ukraine. Last month, Hungarian Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó opposed a no-fly zone over Ukraine, as well as Poland's proposed peacekeeping operation. The pro-government state media in Hungary is spreading conspiracy theories similar to those disseminated by Russia's main state TV channels, like Ukraine is a Nazi junta, or inventing stories about nuclear weapons being prepared by Ukrainians. To make things even worse, Mr. Orban in his victory speech last week called Volodymyr Zelensky an opponent and said he had to fight him. He said, quote, "Now we have to battle the biggest forces, the left wing at home, the international left wing, the Brussels bureaucrats, all the organizations of the Soros Empire, the international media, and finally the Ukrainian president as well. We never had so many opponents."
És a végén még az ukrán elnök is.
Judging by what Hungary has done so far since the invasion started, it's crystal clear that Hungary's stance on the invasion is not the same as the other EU and NATO countries, but perhaps quite opposite. It seems that they are trying to break the Western Union surrounding the sanctions. So what lies behind their negative attitude towards Ukraine and their sympathy for Russia? Many people argue that that's because of Hungary's dependency on Russian energy, while others, including Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine, speculate that it might be due to something bigger and dangerous, a possible Hungarian claim to a Ukrainian region with a substantial Hungarian minority, Zakarpattia. To get a clear view of Hungary's relations with its neighbors, we have to go back to the early 1900s. At that time, Hungary was part of the dual monarchy of Austro-Hungary. It was one of the great powers of Europe when the First World War started. But unfortunately for them, they joined the Central Powers and fought alongside the German Empire and lost the war. Hungary suffered severe territorial losses after the Treaty of Trianon. They lost more than half of their population and 2/3 of their territory. Half of the lost territory was ceded to the newly emerged countries such as Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, and even to Hungary's defeated fellow Austria. The other half was ceded to the old existing Kingdom of Romania. The easternmost part of today's Ukraine, Zakarpattia, was within the territory ceded to Czechoslovakia and called Carpathian Ruthenia at that time. This partitioning, the Treaty of Trianon, traumatized the whole Hungarian nation. They never accepted it. In fact, they did in the paper, but never in their homes, schools, universities. They pushed for the irredentist Greater Hungary ideology, and finally in 1938, before the Second World War started, they again allied with the Germans and managed to get back some of the territories, including Carpathian and Ruthenia. But again, unfortunate for them, the Germans lost again, and Hungary's borders were returned to their pre-1938 lines. Until this day, they never gave up on their Greater Hungary cause. As a matter of fact, it became more prevalent. The partitioning of Hungary after the First World War still grieves many Hungarians. It's like a collective trauma among them. They are obsessed with thinking about the Treaty of Trianon and their territorial losses. The images of Greater Hungary dating from 100 years ago can be seen everywhere in Hungary, on car bumper stickers, t-shirts, roadside maps, etc. But this trauma, this irredentist view, started to become more serious and formal after Hungary's populist far-right leader Viktor Orban came to power in 2010. Since then, Hungarian nationalism has been on rise. In 2011, the new Hungarian constitution declared the date Trianon Treaty was signed, June 4, 1920, one of the greatest tragedies of Hungarian history. And from that year on, they also started substantially funding Hungarians in neighboring countries. Between 2011 and 2019, One Hungarian government agency alone, the Gábor Bethlen Fund, approved grants of at least 1.1 billion euros to Hungarian minority organizations abroad, including those in Ukraine's Zakarpattia Oblast. The money sent through Gábor Bethlen Fund flows mainly into Romania, Slovakia, Ukraine, and to a lesser extent into Serbia, Slovenia, and Croatia. A group of investigative journalists, mainly from those countries, joined forces to work on a massive project and named the project Hungarian Money. According to their research, the money sent through Gábor Bethlen Fund has supported cultural organizations, churches, schools and kindergartens, media outlets, and football clubs. And even some Hungarian political parties in Ukraine have also benefited from that money. What makes Ukraine's Zakarpattia unique is that, unlike other countries with Hungarian minorities, Ukraine's fragile economy, its deep-rooted corruption, and final almost a decade-long armed conflict with Russia, all these things have made it harder for Ukraine to take good care of Zakarpattia, where 150,000 ethnic Hungarians live, thus creating a vacuum for Hungarian social, financial, and political influence in the region. The Hungarian influence can be easily noticed in the western towns of Zakarpattia, such as Beregovie, Uzhgorod, Mukachevo, and others. Last year, a group of Ukrainian journalists, members of the Skimmis TV program, traveled to Zakarpattia to find out more about the Hungarian influence there. According to their report, the Hungarian government provides money to support every aspect of Hungarian life in Zakarpattia, from education to faith. Signs in the streets are often written in Hungarian, and the Hungarian tricolor can sometimes be seen flying in the streets. Even a clock in Beregovia town is set to Budapest time, not Kiev time, which it is supposed to be set. According to calculations performed by the Skimmis reporters, between 2011 and 2020, Zakarpattia received 150 million euros from the Hungarian government. This massive figure is equal to about 1.5 times the annual budget of the Zakarpattia Oblast. With this money, they renovated schools, churches, provided Hungarian retirement pensions. Jesus, that's really weird, providing retirement pensions for citizens of another country. Anyway, organized school trips, summer camps, supported cultural organizations, financed media outlets in Hungarian, and almost anything you can think of. They have virtually created a parallel state with invisible borders inside Ukraine. For example, if you are a local Hungarian businessman in Zakarpattia and want to expand your business, but you need some financial support, you need some funds. In this case, you are going to have two choices. First, you can ask the Ukrainian government representatives, which will go through a lot of bureaucratic steps, and it's not certain whether you are going to be answered passively or not, and most likely not. Second, you can ask the local representatives of the Gábor Bethlen Fund, and boom, you have the money. The Hungarian government will allocate it for you in no time and with very few conditions. The same goes for other spheres of life. You can get support from the Hungarian government for education, healthcare, etc. Considering all these facts, it's quite normal to ask, why does the Hungarian government do it? How do they benefit by pouring all this money into the neighboring countries? For the Hungarian government, the sole purpose is to increase the well-being of their compatriots in those countries, but Ukrainians are quite skeptical about it. For them, it goes far beyond that. In 2018, a video of local Hungarians gathering in the Hungarian consulate in Zakarpattia appeared on the internet. In the video, Hungarian officials issue Hungarian passports to local citizens, even though Ukraine does not allow dual citizenship. Then, those Ukrainian citizens of Hungarian origin recite, "I swear to consider Hungary my motherland. I will be a faithful citizen. I will serve and protect Hungary. So help me God." Then the Hungarian officials ask them to keep it a secret and not to tell the Ukrainian authorities anything about the passports. It caused a huge deterioration in the relations between the two countries. After the incident, Ukraine's foreign ministry declared the Hungarian consul persona non grata and expelled him from the country. In response, Hungary did the same. Similar incidents kept happening over time. For example, in 2019, Mr. Orban met in Budapest with Vasil Brenzovich, a Ukrainian politician of Hungarian origin, who at that time was running for parliament in Ukraine. This meeting occurred a week prior to the election day, and Ukrainians considered this meeting as proof of Hungarian interference in Ukraine's domestic affairs. 1 year later, in the run-up to the local elections in 2020, a Hungarian government representative attempted to visit Zakarpattia to campaign for Brenzovic's KMKSC party, but he was banned from entering the country. The same thing happened to other two high-ranking Hungarian officials as well. But it did not end with it. The aggravated relations between the two neighbor countries were exacerbated even more over another scandalous video that spread on the internet a month later. In the video, members of a Zakarpattian village council sang the Hungarian anthem during the inaugural meeting of the council. Shortly after, Ukrainian security forces raided the offices of the local Hungarian organizations and parties, including the offices of Brenzovic's KMKSC party. Investigators from the security forces of Ukraine started looking for information about the involvement of a foreign charitable foundation and its officials in activities aimed against the sovereignty of Ukraine. Vasil Brenzovic fled to Hungary, and serious charges were brought against him in Ukraine, such as treason as well as activities aimed at violently changing borders. Hungarian authorities responded by summoning the Ukrainian ambassador, while Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó referred to the raids as an incomprehensible political swing regarding the Hungarian parties in Ukraine. Whenever all these incidents took place, whenever Ukrainians complained about the Hungarian political movements in Zakarpattia, Viktor Orban's government showed a Ukrainian language law as a counter-argument. In 2017, Ukraine adopted a new language law that restricted the use of minority languages in Ukrainian schools. Although the main goal of the law was to prevent separatism in Russian-speaking regions of Ukraine, it provoked a huge backlash in Hungary. It was deemed as a violation of the minority rights of the 150,000 Hungarians living in Zakarpattia. Hungary's foreign minister said that Budapest would block Ukraine's membership in NATO because of the language law, and they did so. Since 2018, Hungary has been blocking ministerial-level political meetings between NATO and Ukraine and preventing Ukraine's Western integration. But it's also possible that the language law is just a pretext for Hungary's Prime Minister Mr. Orban to influence wider geopolitical events. On May 5, 2020, Mr. Orban posted his support for students taking their examinations, but with an extremely controversial image. It was an image of a greater Hungary, which millions of Hungarians hope to see in their lifetime. The image freaked out Hungary's neighbors and triggered an instant backlash. 1 month later, on June 4, 2020, exactly 100 years after the Trianon Treaty was signed, a monument of national solidarity was opened in Budapest, right in front of the parliament. The names of the 12,485 cities and villages of a greater Hungary are engraved on its walls. But it's not just Orban and the Hungarian government pursuing these policies. Orban has won 5 terms, the last 4 of which were consecutive. The elections were not rigged, people simply voted for him. For example, in the last election, 6 parties came together to form a coalition against Orban's Fidesz party, but Orban still won with a crashing victory. It means that people love him, people love what he does and his irredented policies. In a 2020 survey by the Pew Research Center, 67% of the Hungarians said they thought neighboring countries really belonged to them. It was the highest share of any of the 19 European states surveyed. Judging by all these facts, it's quite logical to believe that Hungary's stance on the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine and its attitude towards Ukraine might not be just because of Hungary's energy dependence on Russia. That's why Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister Irina Vereshchuk questioned Hungary's position on the ongoing war. Quote, "The Hungarians say no to practically everything. Before long, Budapest's official rhetoric will be openly pro-Russian. What is this all about? Do they want some cheap Russian gas, or maybe they want our Zakarpattia?" It seems that Hungary is already breaking ranks with the European Union because of its stance on the war. Hungary's attempts to break the union surrounding the sanctions are alienating Hungary in the European Union. But a special rift with Poland, which is one of the key players in the sanction war against Russia, shows how estranged Hungary has become in the Western world. Poland, a long-term ally of Hungary in its clashes with the EU over the refugee crisis, LGBT rights and so on, has criticized Budapest for its position on the ongoing war. Because Viktor Orban has already assured his next 4 years as the Prime Minister of Hungary, it's expected that his pro-Russian rhetoric will become more direct, and the rift between the EU and Hungary will further deepen, moving Hungary closer to Russia even more. Orban showed Russia as an example of successful illiberal democracy, and he has also supported illiberal democracy democracy since 2014. Like Putin, Orban also offered traditional Christian values instead of modern liberalism, and focused heavily on strengthening national pride in his country. Similar to Russia, Hungary too claims to be under attack by sinister forces from the West. Both leaders consider the fall of their empires as the greatest tragedy of the previous century, although there were far more terrible events such as the two world wars in the 20th century. I can continue talking about the similarities between the two countries and their leaders for hours, but I believe it's enough to say that by nature they are extremely similar to each other. Now Europe is facing its biggest conflict after the Second World War, and Hungary seems to have all the chosen its side, which shares a lot of common values and goals with Hungary. But we know from history that Hungary is really bad at choosing sides whenever a war is at Hungary's door.